The stagecoach rattled violently as it bounced over another rut in the dusty trail, jostling Lillian Davies against the hard wooden seat. Her hands clutched the letter that had brought her here miles from Boston, the only home she'd ever known, to this unforgiving wilderness called Wyoming Territory. 1877 was supposed to be her year of renewal, but as the coach neared Sweetwater Springs, doubt clawed at her resolve. "Nearly there, miss," the driver called down. "Sweetwater Springs just beyond that ridge." Lillian smoothed her travel-worn skirt and attempted to tidy her chestnut hair that had long ago escaped its pins. The letter crinkled in her grip, a promise of marriage from a man she'd never met, a rancher named Calvin Montgomery, who had placed an advertisement for a bride in the Eastern papers. After her father's death left her penniless and facing the unsavory attention of her father's creditors, becoming a mail-order bride had seemed her only escape. "You'll be fine," she whispered to herself, rehearsing the mantra that had carried her across the country. "You're 22 years old. You've made your choice." The stagecoach crested the ridge, revealing a small settlement nestled in a valley. Sweetwater Springs was nothing like Boston, a dusty main street lined with wooden buildings, a few side streets of modest homes, and beyond that, the vast emptiness of the Wyoming prairie stretching toward distant mountains. As the coach rolled into town, Lillian's stomach tightened. What if Calvin Montgomery was cruel? What if he took one look at her and sent her away? The unknowns threatened to overwhelm her as the coach lurched to a stop outside the Sweetwater Springs Hotel. "Last stop," the driver announced, jumping down to open the door. Lillian gathered her courage along with her small carpet bag and stepped down into the swirling dust. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she squinted against its brightness, searching the small crowd for someone who might be her intended husband. A man approached, tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy hair beneath a weather-worn hat. His face was sun-darkened and clean-shaven, blue eyes regarding her with unmistakable interest. "Miss Davies?" he asked, removing his hat. Lillian nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Yes, name's Dean Harper," he said, extending a hand. "Calvin Montgomery asked me to collect you. He's been held up at his ranch and couldn't make it to town." Disappointment mingled with relief in her chest. "Oh, I see. Don't worry, madam. I'll see you safe to the Montgomery place. It's about an hour's ride from here." His smile seemed friendly enough, but something in his eyes made Lillian uneasy. "Thank you, Mr. Harper, but perhaps I should wait at the hotel." "If Mr. Montgomery knows I've arrived, now, that wouldn't do at all," Harper interrupted, reaching for her bag. "Cal's expecting you tonight. Got everything prepared special-like. I've got a wagon just down the street." Before Lillian could protest further, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street. A man burst through the batwing doors, stumbling into the street. He was followed by another man who moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin, despite his evident anger. "You think you can cheat Colt Madsen and walk away?" the second man called out, his voice carrying across the street. Lillian froze. The man named Colt was tall and powerfully built, with dark hair and eyes that flashed dangerously even from a distance. He wore dusty range clothes, a gun belt slung low on his hips, and carried himself with an authority that drew all eyes to him. The first man raised his hands placatingly. "Now, Madsen, it was just a friendly game. Nothing friendly about marked cards, Watkins." The gathering crowd backed away, creating a circle around the two men. Harper's grip on Lillian's arm tightened. "Town business," he muttered. "Best we be on our way." "But shouldn't someone," Lillian began, but Harper was already pulling her toward a wagon parked at the end of the street. Miss Davies," the shout made Lillian turn. A woman was hurrying toward them from the general store, waving frantically. "Miss Davies." "Wait." The woman, middle-aged with gray-streaked hair tied in a severe bun, reached them breathlessly. "I'm Martha Simmons, the storekeeper's wife. Cal Montgomery asked me to watch for you. He said to tell you he'd be in town tomorrow to meet you proper." Her suspicious gaze shifted to Harper. "What are you doing with Miss Davies, Dean Harper?" Harper's friendly demeanor vanished. "Just offering the lady a ride, Mrs. Simmons. No harm in that." "Cal Montgomery specifically asked me to make sure Miss Davies got settled at the hotel," Martha insisted. "Said he'd come fetch her himself tomorrow." She turned to Lillian. "Mr. Montgomery wanted you to have time to rest after your journey before heading out to the ranch." Confusion and alarm swept through Lillian. Harper was still gripping her arm, his fingers digging in painfully now. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Lillian said, attempting to extricate herself from Harper's hold. "No misunderstanding," Harper growled, no longer bothering with pleasantries. "You're coming with me." "She most certainly is not," Martha declared, reaching for Lillian's other arm. The standoff might have escalated further had the commotion from across the street not concluded with a gunshot that made Lillian jump. Everyone turned to see the man called Watkins sprawled in the dust, clutching his shoulder, while Colt Madsen holstered his smoking pistol. In the momentary distraction, Harper's grip loosened enough for Lillian to pull away. She stumbled backward, directly into the path of Colt Madsen, who was crossing the street with long, purposeful strides. "Excuse me," she gasped, steadying herself against his solid chest. Madsen's hands caught her shoulders, keeping her upright. For a moment, those dark eyes assessed her with surprise and something else she couldn't name. "You're new in town," he stated simply. "She's Montgomery's mail-order bride," Harper snarled, advancing toward them, "and she's coming with me." Madsen's expression hardened. "That's so." He glanced at Martha Simmons, who was shaking her head vigorously. "Cal asked me to watch for her arrival," Martha insisted. "Said he'd be in town tomorrow. This one," she jerked her head toward Harper, "is lying through his teeth." Harper's hand drifted toward his gun. "This ain't your business, Madsen." "I'm making it my business." Madsen's voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable threat. "The lady doesn't seem eager for your company, Harper." "The Montgomery place is my property now," Harper declared. "Won it fair and square last night. Cal's gone. Left town this morning after losing everything. That includes any claim to his mail-order bride." Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" Martha gasped. "That can't be true. Cal wouldn't gamble away his ranch." "Believe what you want," Harper sneered. "But I've got the deed, and I'll be needing a woman to help run the place." His gaze raked over Lillian with undisguised hunger. "Seems convenient one just arrived." Madsen shifted, placing himself more fully between Lillian and Harper. "That's not how it works, Harper. The lady isn't property to be won in a card game. She came out here to marry Montgomery and work his ranch. That ranch is mine now." Harper's smile turned ugly. "Unless you're offering to repay Montgomery's debts." A crowd was gathering, drawn by the confrontation. Lillian felt panic rising in her throat. She had spent nearly every penny she had on the journey west. She had nowhere to go, no way to return east, and the man she'd agreed to marry was apparently gone. "I'll pay Montgomery's debts," Madsen said suddenly, surprising everyone, including Lillian. "Name your price." Harper laughed. "You can't afford it, Madsen. The Lazium might be a decent spread, but the Montgomery place is twice its size with water rights to boot." "Name your price," Madsen repeated, his voice like steel. Something in his tone made Harper hesitate. $5,000, he finally said with a smirk. "Cash, by tomorrow noon." Murmurs rippled through the gathered townspeople. It was an impossible sum. "Done," Madsen said without hesitation. Sheriff Brennan can witness the transaction tomorrow at the bank. Harper's smirk faltered. You're bluffing. Test me and find out. Madsen's hand hadn't moved toward his gun, but the threat was clear nonetheless. After a tense moment, Harper spat in the dust. Fine. Tomorrow at noon. But if you don't have the money, the woman comes with me. He stalked away, shouldering roughly past a few onlookers. Only when Harper disappeared into the saloon did Lillian realize she'd been holding her breath. She turned to face her unexpected champion, confusion and gratitude warring within her. Thank you, Mr. Madsen, but I can't possibly allow you to— Colt, he corrected, finally removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair. And we can discuss the details later. Right now, you need a safe place to stay until we sort this out. Martha stepped forward. The hotel's got a room ready for her, just as Cal arranged. I'll get her settled. Madsen nodded. I'll check on you this evening, Miss Davies. We have matters to discuss. How did you know my name? Lillian asked, realizing he'd addressed her correctly without introduction. A faint smile crossed his face. Small town. Word travels fast when a mail-order bride is expected. He settled his hat back on his head. Rest now, you're safe here. As Martha led her toward the hotel, Lillian couldn't help glancing back at Colt Madsen. He stood watching them, a solitary figure in the dusty street, and she wondered what sort of man would offer $5,000 to help a woman he'd never met. The hotel room was simple but clean: a narrow bed, a washstand, a small dresser, and a chair by the window that overlooked the main street. After Martha left with promises to return with supper, Lillian sank onto the bed and finally allowed the tears to come. Everything had gone terribly wrong. Calvin Montgomery, the man whose letters had seemed so decent and honest, had gambled away his ranch and disappeared. Dean Harper clearly intended to claim her as part of his winnings. And now, a stranger named Colt Madsen had involved himself in her predicament for reasons she couldn't fathom. She pulled Montgomery's letters from her reticule and reread them, searching for any sign that he was the type of man who would abandon his responsibilities and her so casually. The letters revealed nothing new, just the same straightforward accounts of ranch life and humble hopes for a marriage based on mutual respect and companionship. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She hastily wiped her eyes and smoothed her hair before opening it a crack. Martha stood there with a covered tray. Brought you some supper, dear, and Sheriff Brennan would like a word if you're up to it. Lillian nodded and opened the door wider, revealing a gray-haired man with a silver star pinned to his vest standing behind Martha. Miss Davies, he said with a respectful nod. I'm Sheriff Thomas Brennan. Thought I should check on you given the circumstances. Thank you, Sheriff. Lillian stepped back to allow them both entry. I must admit I'm rather overwhelmed. Martha set the tray on the small table by the window. Eat while it's hot, dear. The sheriff and I can fill you in on a few things. As Lillian reluctantly began eating the simple but hearty stew, Sheriff Brennan settled into the chair across from her. First thing you should know is that Cal Montgomery is a good man, he said. I've known him 10 years, and he's never been one for gambling or drinking to excess. Then how did he lose his ranch to Dean Harper? Lillian asked between bites, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. Martha and the sheriff exchanged looks. That's the peculiar part, Martha said. Cal's no fool, and he was excited about your arrival. Had his housekeeper air out the place and fix up a proper room for you. Harper's been trying to get his hands on the Montgomery ranch for years, Sheriff Brennan added. It controls access to the North Pass and the best water in the county. Cal's always refused to sell, even when Harper offered good money. Lillian set down her spoon. Are you suggesting foul play? I'm saying it's mighty convenient that Cal supposedly lost everything the very day his bride was due to arrive, the sheriff replied, and then vanished without a word to anyone. Could Mr. Montgomery have been harmed? No body's been found, Brennan said grimly. I've got men looking, but if Harper did something, he covered his tracks well. Martha patted Lillian's hand. Don't you worry too much, dear. Colt Madsen's involved now, and he's not a man who gives up easily. About Mr. Madsen, Lillian said hesitantly. Why would he offer such a sum to help me? He doesn't even know me. Another significant glance passed between the sheriff and Martha. Colt's got his reasons, Sheriff Brennan said carefully. He and Cal Montgomery go back a ways. There's history there. What kind of history? Lillian pressed. Not my story to tell, the sheriff replied, standing. But you can trust Madsen. Whatever his faults, he's a man of his word. And he has the money. Lillian couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Martha smiled. The Lazy M might not be as big as the Montgomery place, but it's prosperous. Colt's built it up from nothing over the last 5 years. Smart businessman despite his reputation. What reputation? The sheriff cleared his throat. Miss Davies, every man out here has a past, some more colorful than others. What matters is who they are now. He settled his hat on his head. I'll stop by in the morning. In the meantime, keep your door locked. After they left, Lillian finished her meal and prepared for bed, her mind spinning with questions. Who was Colt Madsen really? What was his connection to Calvin Montgomery? And what would become of her if Madsen couldn't produce the money tomorrow? Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. She dreamed of dark, flashing eyes and gunshots and woke several times in the unfamiliar room, heart racing. Dawn was just breaking when a soft knock roused her fully. Wrapping herself in her shawl, she approached the door cautiously. Who is it? Colt Madsen, Miss Davies. I apologize for the early hour, but we need to talk before the town wakes. Lillian hesitated. It wouldn't be proper, Mr. Madsen. Proper went out the window when Harper laid claim to you, he replied, his voice low but urgent. 5 minutes, madam, in the hotel dining room. I'll wait while you dress. 10 minutes later, Lillian descended the stairs to find Madsen alone in the dining room, a pot of coffee steaming on the table before him. He rose when she entered, and she was struck again by his imposing presence. In the early morning light, she could see him more clearly, the strong lines of his jaw, the small scar that bisected one dark eyebrow, the intensity in eyes that weren't black as she'd first thought, but a deep forest green. Miss Davies, he greeted her, pulling out a chair. Coffee, thank you. She sat, arranging her skirts nervously. Mr. Madsen, Colt, he corrected again, pouring her a cup. Colt, she conceded. I appreciate your intervention yesterday, but I cannot allow you to pay such a sum on my behalf. I have no way to repay you. He studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. I'm not doing it for you, Miss Davies, at least not entirely. Please call me Lillian. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. And if not for me, then for whom? Calvin Montgomery. The sheriff mentioned you have some history. A muscle worked in Madsen's jaw. Cal saved my life once. I owe him. And $5,000 is the price of that debt. No, he said quietly. That debt can never be repaid, but I can make sure Harper doesn't profit from whatever he's done to Cal. Lillian leaned forward. Then you believe Mr. Montgomery didn't willingly gamble away his ranch? Cal doesn't gamble, doesn't drink to excess, and he certainly wouldn't abandon a woman he'd invited across the country to be his wife. Madsen's voice held absolute conviction. Something happened to him, and Harper's behind it. Have you told the sheriff your suspicions? Tom's a good man, but he needs evidence. I intend to find it. Madsen set down his cup. But first, I need to secure the ranch from Harper. That's where you come in. Lillian tensed. I don't understand. Harper wants the ranch, but he also wants you. Seems he fancies the idea of claiming Cal's mail-order bride along with his property." Madsen's expression darkened. "I'm going to make sure he gets neither. With $5,000 you don't actually have." Lillian guessed, remembering the murmurs of the crowd. To her surprise, Madsen smiled slightly. "I have it, or will once the bank opens. Been saving for years to expand the Lazy M. This isn't how I plan to spend it, but some things matter more than land." "Justice," Lillian said softly. "That and keeping a lady safe." His gaze was direct, assessing. "Which brings me to my proposal." Lillian nearly choked on her coffee. "Proposal, not that kind," he clarified quickly. "Though in a way, Harper expects you to be a bride, Cal's bride. If I pay off his debts and claim the ranch, there's nothing to stop Harper from coming after you directly. Unless—" "Unless what?" Lillian prompted when he hesitated. Madsen leaned forward. "Unless the mail-order bride has already married someone else. Me, specifically." Lillian stared at him, speechless. "It would be temporary," he continued quickly. "Just until we figure out what happened to Cal and bring Harper to justice. A marriage in name only. You'd have the protection of my name and a safe place to stay at the Lazy M." "You're suggesting we commit fraud," Lillian said when she found her voice. "I'm suggesting we protect you and preserve Cal's property until he returns, or until we know for certain he won't." Madsen's expression was earnest now. "I know it's not what you came west for, Lillian. But your alternatives are limited." She knew he was right. Without funds, she couldn't return east. Without Calvin Montgomery, she had no place here. And Harper had made his intentions frighteningly clear. "If I agree," she said carefully, "what happens afterward?" "When we find Mr. Montgomery or prove what happened to him. Then you're free to make whatever choice serves you best. Stay and marry Cal if that's still what you both want. Return east if you can. Or—" he hesitated again, "or make a new life here in Sweetwater Springs. There's always need for educated women to teach or work in the businesses in town. And our marriage would be annulled, if that's what you want, yes." Something flickered in his eyes that she couldn't interpret. Lillian took a deep breath. "When would this arrangement need to begin?" "Today. Before noon. Harper won't be expecting it, which gives us an advantage." "You're asking me to marry a man I've known less than a day," Lillian said, shaking her head in disbelief. "You were prepared to marry Cal having never met him at all," Madsen pointed out. "That was different. We'd exchanged letters for months. I felt I knew his character, his expectations." "And what were his expectations, Lillian?" Madsen asked quietly. "What kind of marriage were you anticipating with a stranger?" She flushed. "A practical arrangement. Companionship, mutual respect, perhaps friendship in time. He needed a wife to help manage his household, and I needed—" She trailed off. "Safety," Madsen finished for her. "Security. A fresh start away from whatever drove you to become a mail-order bride in the first place." Lillian lifted her chin. "My reasons are my own, Mr. Madsen. Colt," he corrected automatically. "And yes, they are. Just as my offer stands on its own merits. Safety, security, and the chance to see justice done, with no expectations beyond that." He stood. "Think it over. I'll return at 10 o'clock for your answer." He was nearly to the door when Lillian called after him. "And if I refuse," he turned back, "then I'll still pay Harper and secure the ranch, and I'll still do everything in my power to keep you safe. But it will be considerably more difficult for both of us." After he left, Lillian remained at the table, her coffee growing cold as she considered her limited options. A temporary marriage to Colt Madsen seemed outlandish, improper, and potentially scandalous. Yet the alternative, being at Dean Harper's mercy, was unthinkable. She was still deliberating when Martha Simmons found her an hour later. "There you are, dear. I brought you a proper breakfast, and oh my, You look troubled." Martha set down a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "What's happened now?" Lillian hesitated, then decided Martha's counsel might prove valuable. She explained Madsen's proposal, watching the older woman's expression shift from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "It's not the conventional path," Martha admitted when Lillian finished. "But these are unusual circumstances, and if any man in this town can protect you from Harper, it's Colt Madsen." "I don't know anything about him," Lillian protested. Martha smiled wryly. "You know he was willing to spend his life savings to help a woman he'd just met." "That tells you something about his character, doesn't it?" The sheriff mentioned he has a reputation. "What did he mean by that?" Martha sighed, glancing around the empty dining room. "Colt wasn't always a rancher. He rode with some rough men before he settled here. There are rumors about those years that he was a hired gun, maybe even an outlaw. Nothing confirmed, mind you." Lillian's eyes widened. "And people just accepted him here. The West gives second chances to those willing to work for them," Martha said simply. "Colt came here 5 years ago, bought a run-down piece of land nobody wanted, and turned it into one of the most successful operations in the county. He employs a dozen men, pays fair wages, and settles his accounts promptly. Whatever he might have been before, he's proven himself a valuable member of this community. And his connection to Calvin Montgomery," Martha's expression softened. "That's a story that goes back to Colt's arrival. Cal found him half dead in a snowstorm that first winter. Brought him to the ranch, nursed him back to health. Never asked questions about the bullet wound in his shoulder or why Colt was riding alone through a blizzard. So he owes Mr. Montgomery his life," Lillian murmured. "No wonder he's determined to help." "There's more to it," Martha said. "They became friends, genuine friends, despite being different as day and night. Cal's quiet, thoughtful, a man who'd rather read than carouse. Colt's more intense, but they respected each other." She patted Lillian's hand. "If Cal trusted Colt, that should count for something." Lillian picked at the biscuits Martha had brought. "What would people think? If I married Mr. Madsen so suddenly?" "They'd talk," Martha acknowledged. "People always do, but in time they'd understand, especially once the truth about Harper comes out." "If it comes out," Lillian corrected. "We don't know for certain that he's responsible for Mr. Montgomery's disappearance." "Don't we?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "A man like Dean Harper doesn't suddenly acquire a deed to a valuable ranch through honest means, not when the owner has refused to sell for years." "Mr. Madsen Colt said it would be temporary," Lillian said hesitantly. "Until we learn the truth about Mr. Montgomery." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Maybe, maybe not. Life has a way of changing our plans, especially out here." She stood. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But don't take too long deciding. Harper won't be patient forever." After Martha left, Lillian returned to her room to wash and change. She donned her best dress, a deep blue merino wool that brought out the gray blue of her eyes, and arranged her hair in a simple but elegant knot. If she was going to make a life-altering decision, she would do so looking her best. At precisely 10 o'clock, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, Colt Madsen stood in the hallway, similarly transformed from the previous day. Gone were the dusty range clothes, replaced by a clean black suit, crisp white shirt, and polished boots. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard to a clean line along his jaw. "Miss Davies," he greeted her, hat in hand. "Mr. Madsen." She stepped back to allow him entry, suddenly nervous. He remained in the doorway. "I'd prefer to have this conversation where there are witnesses, for your reputation." Touched by his consideration, Lillian nodded and followed him down to the hotel's small sitting room, where several guests were reading newspapers or engaged in quiet conversation. They sat in a corner, far enough from others for privacy, but still within sight of everyone. Have you decided? Madsen asked without preamble. Lillian took a deep breath. I have conditions. Something like approval flickered in his eyes. Name them. First, this arrangement remains strictly business, a temporary solution to protect both my person and Mr. Montgomery's property. He nodded. Agreed. Second, when Mr. Montgomery is found alive, I hope, or when we've discovered what happened to him, our arrangement ends. You'll facilitate an annulment or divorce, whatever is necessary. If that's what you want when the time comes, yes. Lillian noted his careful phrasing but continued. Third, I maintain my own quarters and privacy, both during our marriage and afterward, should I need time to make new arrangements. The Lazy M has a small cabin near the main house. It was intended for the foreman, but he prefers the bunkhouse. It would be yours for as long as you need it. Fourth, I want to help with the investigation into Mr. Montgomery's disappearance. I won't be kept in the dark or treated as incapable because I'm a woman. This condition seemed to surprise him, but he nodded slowly. We'll work together, but you must promise to be careful. Harper is dangerous. As are you by all accounts, Lillian replied evenly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes, but not to you. My final condition, Lillian said, meeting his gaze directly, is honesty between us. If this arrangement is to work, even temporarily, there can be no secrets or half-truths that might endanger either of us. Madsen was silent for a long moment. That's a steep condition, Lillian. Everyone has parts of their past they'd prefer to keep private. I'm not asking for your life story, she clarified. Only that you don't hide things that might affect our current situation or the search for Mr. Montgomery. He considered this, then nodded. Fair enough. Anything else? Lillian squared her shoulders. Just one question. Why are you really doing this? Is it truly just a debt to Mr. Montgomery, or is there more you're not telling me? There's always more, he admitted quietly. But the core reason is simple. I couldn't live with myself if I stood by and let Harper claim both Cal's land and his bride. Not when I have the means to prevent it. He leaned forward slightly. Does that satisfy your conditions? It does, Lillian said, making her decision. I accept your proposal, Mr. Madsen, or should I say your proposition. Relief visibly washed over his features. Good. The preacher's expecting us at 11. That gives us time to stop by the bank first. Today, so soon. Despite having just agreed, Lillian felt a flutter of panic. Harper expects me at noon with the money, Madsen reminded her. By then, I want you to be Mrs. Madsen, legally and irrefutably. Mrs. Madsen. The name sounded foreign, impossible. Yesterday, she had been preparing to become Mrs. Montgomery. Now she was agreeing to marry a man who might have been an outlaw, all to thwart another man who might be a murderer. This isn't quite how I imagined my arrival in Sweetwater Springs, Lillian said with a shaky laugh. Madsen's expression softened fractionally. It's not how any of us imagined it, but we adapt to survive out here. He stood and offered his arm. Shall we proceed, Miss Davies? We have a marriage to arrange and a villain to confront. Lillian placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the suit jacket. Lead the way, Mr. Madsen. The bank was a modest brick building at the center of town. Inside, the banker, Mr. Hoffman, greeted Colt with surprised deference. Mr. Madsen, didn't expect to see you today. What can I do for you? I need to make a substantial withdrawal, Henry. $5,000. Hoffman's bushy eyebrows shot up. That's nearly your entire account, Colt. I'm aware. Madsen's tone discouraged further questions. While Hoffman disappeared into the back to prepare the funds, Lillian glanced at Colt. You're really doing this? Emptying your savings to save a ranch that isn't yours? Money can be earned again, he replied simply. Some things can't be replaced. The transaction completed, they made their way to a small white church at the edge of town. The Reverend Wilson, a kindly man with spectacles perched on his nose, seemed equally surprised by their arrival but recovered quickly. A wedding, today. Well, this is unexpected but certainly not unprecedented in these parts. He peered at Lillian. You're Calvin Montgomery's intended, aren't you? I received his letter saying you'd be arriving soon. There's been a change of circumstances, Madsen explained briefly. Miss Davies and I wish to be married immediately. The Reverend looked between them, clearly sensing there was more to the story. I see, and you're both entering into this union of your own free will. Yes, Lillian said firmly, surprising herself with her conviction. We are. Well then. I'll need witnesses. Mrs. Wilson can be one, but we'll need another. I'll fetch Sheriff Brennan, Colt said. He should witness this in any case. 20 minutes later, Lillian found herself standing before the altar beside Colt Madsen, repeating vows she'd never expected to say to him. Sheriff Brennan and Mrs. Wilson stood witness, their expressions a mixture of concern and cautious approval. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Wilson concluded. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Madsen. Lillian tensed, suddenly realizing they hadn't discussed this part of the ceremony. Madsen seemed equally caught off guard but recovered quickly. He leaned in and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her lips, a mere touch, really, but enough to send an unexpected warmth through her. Congratulations, Sheriff Brennan said as he signed the marriage certificate. I hope you know what you're doing, both of you. Preventing a grave injustice, Colt replied, offering his arm to Lillian. Now, if you'll excuse us, Sheriff, my wife and I have an appointment at noon with Dean Harper. Wife. The word echoed in Lillian's mind as they walked back toward the center of town. She was Colt Madsen's wife, at least on paper. The reality of what she'd done was beginning to sink in. Are you all right? Colt asked quietly, noticing her silence. I'm not sure, she admitted. This morning I was Lillian Davies, mail-order bride with an uncertain future. Now I'm Mrs. Madsen, participating in a dangerous confrontation with a potentially murderous man. If you'd prefer to wait at the hotel, no, she interrupted firmly. I said I wanted to be part of this, and I meant it. Mr. Montgomery invited me here in good faith. If something's happened to him, I want to look Dean Harper in the eye when we take back what he's stolen. Madsen studied her with new respect. You're braver than I expected. Necessity breeds courage, Mr. Madsen. Colt, he corrected for the third time. And considering we're married now, even temporarily, you should probably get used to using it. A blush crept into her cheeks. Colt, she amended, it will take some getting used to for both of us. He patted her hand where it rested on his arm. Here we are. They had reached the sheriff's office, where Dean Harper was already waiting with Sheriff Brennan and two other men Lillian didn't recognize. Harper's smug expression faltered when he saw Lillian on Colt's arm. Right on time, Harper drawled, recovering quickly. Though I didn't expect you to bring the prize with you, Madsen. Mrs. Madsen insisted on attending, Colt replied, emphasizing the title deliberately. Harper's face darkened. What did you say? Sheriff Brennan stepped forward. Miss Davies and Mr. Madsen were married this morning, Dean. It's all legal and proper. That's impossible, Harper sputtered. She's Montgomery's bride. Montgomery isn't here, Colt said coldly. And Miss Davies, Mrs. Madsen, now was free to make her own choice. Harper's hand drifted toward his gun. You cheating, careful, Sheriff Brennan warned, his own hand moving to his sidearm. This is all above board, Harper. The lady made her choice freely. Lillian lifted her chin. Indeed I did, Mr. Harper. And even had I not married Mr. Madsen, I certainly would never have consented to be claimed like property by the man who stole my intended's ranch through dubious means. Dubious. Harper's laugh held no humor. Montgomery bet his ranch fair and square. Did he? Colt asked quietly. Funny, considering Cal's never gambled more than $1 on anything in his life. People change, Harper snapped, especially when they're desperate. And what would make Cal Montgomery desperate? Sheriff Brennan asked. His ranch was prosperous, his debts minimal. Harper shrugged. Ask him yourself if you can find him. The implied threat wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Colt's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. From a pocket inside his jacket, he withdrew an envelope. $5,000 as agreed, he said, holding it out. Sheriff Brennan can count it. Harper eyed the envelope suspiciously. Thought you were bluffing about having that kind of cash. I don't bluff, Colt replied. The deed to the Montgomery ranch. With obvious reluctance, Harper produced a folded document from his vest pocket. It's all there, signed and everything. Sheriff Brennan took both the money and the deed, examining each carefully. The money's correct, he confirmed, counting out the bills. As for this deed, he studied it closely. Signature looks like Cal's, but I'd need to compare it to be certain. It's his, Harper insisted. Ask Fletcher and Barnes here. They witnessed it fair and square. The two men Harper had brought with him, a thin, nervous-looking individual and a burlier man with a perpetual scowl, nodded in agreement. We saw Montgomery sign it. The thin one, presumably Fletcher, confirmed. Colt's expression remained skeptical, but he nodded to the sheriff. Complete the transaction. The ranch returns to its rightful ownership. Not rightful, Harper corrected with a sneer. Legal. I want it fair. You've made your point, Sheriff Brennan interrupted. The money's been paid, the deed transferred. Your business here is concluded, Harper. For a moment, it seemed Harper might argue further, but after a tense silence, he snatched the envelope of money from the sheriff's desk. Pleasure doing business with you, Madsen, he said mockingly. Enjoy your new property, and your new bride. The emphasis he placed on the last word made Lillian's skin crawl, but she maintained her composure until Harper and his associates had departed. That man is hiding something, she said once the door closed behind them. More than something, Colt agreed, examining the deed Sheriff Brennan had handed him. Cal's signature looks forced, like his hand was guided or compelled. Sheriff Brennan frowned. Not enough to prove coercion in court, not without Cal himself testifying. Then we find him, Colt said firmly. Dead or alive. The grim determination in his voice sent a shiver down Lillian's spine. This was more than a debt being repaid. This was a personal mission. What now? She asked. Now, Colt said, carefully folding the deed and tucking it into his jacket, we go to the Montgomery ranch. If there are clues to what happened to Cal, that's where we'll find them. I'll ride out later today, Sheriff Brennan promised. See if my deputies and I can pick up any trail. Harper's involved somehow, but he's too smart to have done the dirty work himself. Fletcher and Barnes, Lillian suggested. They seemed nervous, especially the thin one. Colt nodded approvingly. Good observation. Tom, maybe lean on Fletcher a bit. He strikes me as the type who'd crack under pressure. Already planning on it, the sheriff agreed. You two be careful out at the ranch. Harper might decide $5,000 doesn't quite cover his losses. I can handle Harper, Colt said with quiet confidence that left no doubt in Lillian's mind. They left the sheriff's office and returned to the hotel, where Lillian quickly gathered her few belongings. Within the hour, they were in Colt's wagon, heading north out of Sweetwater Springs toward the Montgomery ranch. The journey took nearly 2 hours along a rutted trail that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with stands of pine and aspen. In the distance, the mountains rose against the clear blue sky, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer warmth. It's beautiful country, Lillian observed, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. That it is, Colt agreed. Different from the East, I imagine. Very different from Boston, she confirmed. Everything here feels vaster, more open, as if a person could breathe more freely. A hint of a smile touched his lips. That's why many of us came west, to breathe freely. Is that why you came? She asked, then quickly added, I'm sorry, I don't mean to pry into what you called the private parts of your past. It's a fair question, he said after a moment. And yes, partly. I needed a fresh start away from complications back east. Complications, he glanced at her. The kind that might have ended with me in prison, or worse. Lillian absorbed this confirmation of what Martha had implied. I see. Does that concern you? Being married, even temporarily, to a man with such a past? I don't know who that man was, she replied carefully. I only know the man beside me now who emptied his savings to help a friend and protect a woman he'd just met. Something in Colt's expression softened. You're not what I expected, Lillian Davies. Madsen, she corrected with a small smile. At least for now, he chuckled, a warm sound that transformed his features. Indeed, Lillian Madsen it is. They crested a small rise, and suddenly the Montgomery ranch spread before them, a substantial two-story house built of golden pine logs, several outbuildings, a large barn, and corrals where horses grazed peacefully. Beyond the immediate homestead, herds of cattle dotted the verdant pastures that stretched toward distant hills. It's lovely, Lillian breathed, understanding now why Dean Harper had coveted this land so fiercely. Cal built it from nothing, Colt said, pride evident in his voice. Came out here 12 years ago with just a wagon and a dream, worked himself to the bone to make it what it is today. Not the sort of accomplishment a man would gamble away, Lillian noted. Exactly. Colt guided the wagon toward the house. Which is why we're going to find out what really happened. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and the weathered complexion of someone who'd spent a lifetime under the western sun. Mrs. Espinoza, Colt called in greeting. Didn't expect to find you still here. Mr. Madsen. The woman hurried toward the wagon as they pulled up. Thank the saints you've come. I was beside myself with worry. Colt jumped down and helped Lillian descend more carefully. Mrs. Espinoza, this is Lillian Madsen, my wife. The housekeeper's eyes widened in shock. Wife, but I thought. She looked between them, confusion evident on her face. There's been a change of circumstances, Colt explained. Lillian was indeed Cal's intended, but matters have taken an unexpected turn. So I see, Mrs. Espinoza said, recovering her composure. Well, Mrs. Madsen, welcome to the Montgomery Ranch, though I suppose it might be the Madsen Ranch now. The Montgomery Ranch, Colt corrected firmly. I'm merely its caretaker until Cal returns. Hope blazed in Mrs. Espinoza's dark eyes. Then you believe he's alive? That horrible Harper man said Mr. Montgomery had left for good, that I was to clear out by the end of the week. Harper lied about many things, Lillian said gently. We're trying to discover the truth about Mr. Montgomery's disappearance. Mrs. Espinoza crossed herself. I knew something was wrong. Mr. Montgomery was so excited about his bride's arrival, had me prepare the blue room specially with fresh curtains and linens. Her gaze shifted to Lillian apologetically. For you, I thought. I still want to see it, Lillian assured her. Any insight into Mr. Montgomery's character and habits might help us determine what happened to him. The housekeeper nodded approvingly. You've a good head on your shoulders, Mrs. Madsen. Come inside, both of you. I'll put on coffee and tell you everything I know about that night. Inside, the house was surprisingly spacious and well appointed for a bachelor's dwelling. The main floor comprised a large living area with comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace, a formal dining room, and a well-equipped kitchen where Mrs. Espinosa had clearly held domain. A hallway led to what appeared to be a study, and a wide staircase ascended to the second floor. "Mr. Montgomery has had simple but refined tastes," Lillian observed, noting the quality of the furnishings and the bookshelves lining one wall of the living room. "Cal always said just because we live on the frontier doesn't mean we must live like savages," Mrs. Espinosa confirmed with a fond smile. "He ordered most of the furniture from Denver. The books come from as far away as New York and even London." While Mrs. Espinosa prepared coffee in the kitchen, Colt moved to examine the study more closely. Lillian followed, taking in the neat desk, the ledgers arranged in perfect order, the carefully organized correspondence trays. "Not the habits of a man prone to reckless gambling," she noted. "No." Colt was rifling through papers on the desk. "Cal was methodical, careful with his finances. Always knew exactly where he stood." "What are you looking for? Anything unusual? Threats, unexpected correspondence, financial troubles he might have kept hidden?" Lillian moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. Philosophy, history, literature. Calvin Montgomery's tastes aligned surprisingly well with her own. She pulled out a volume of Emerson's essays, noting marginal notes in a neat, educated hand. "He was well read," she murmured. "His letters suggested as much, but seeing his library—" "Cal valued education," Colt said, still examining papers. "Talked about starting a proper school in Sweetwater Springs someday." He glanced up at her. "He mentioned in his letters that you were a teacher in Boston." "Yes, at a ladies' seminary," Lillian confirmed, surprised he knew this detail. "You read our correspondence." "Cal shared some of your letters," Colt admitted. "He was quite taken with your intelligence and practical nature, even before meeting you." A pang of sadness hit Lillian unexpectedly. She might have been happy with Calvin Montgomery, based on everything she was learning about him. "Coffee's ready," Mrs. Espinosa announced from the doorway, "and I've prepared some lunch. You must be hungry after your journey." Over a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Mrs. Espinosa recounted the events leading to Calvin Montgomery's disappearance. "It was 3 days ago," she began. "Mr. Montgomery was in fine spirits, making final preparations for Miss Davies' arrival. He'd ridden to town in the morning to confirm the stagecoach schedule, returned mid-afternoon." She shook her head sadly. "That's when Harper arrived with those 2 weasels, Fletcher and Barnes." "What did they want?" Colt asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Same as always, trying to convince Mr. Montgomery to sell the ranch. But this time they brought a bottle of whiskey, said they wanted to celebrate the upcoming arrival of his bride." Mrs. Espinosa's disapproval was evident. "Mr. Montgomery rarely drinks, but he allowed them to pour him 1 glass to be sociable. And then—" Lillian prompted when the housekeeper paused. "I served them dinner. Mr. Montgomery seemed strange, unsteady. His words were slurred, but he'd only had the 1 drink." Her dark eyes flashed with anger. "They drugged him, I'm certain of it." Colt's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "What happened next?" "They moved to the study. I could hear raised voices, Harper demanding something, Mr. Montgomery refusing. Then quiet, too quiet." Mrs. Espinosa's voice wavered. "I went to check and found Mr. Montgomery slumped at his desk, barely conscious. Harper had a paper in front of him, the deed, I now realize, and was forcing a pen into his hand." "You witnessed this?" Colt demanded, leaning forward. "From the doorway." "They didn't see me." Shame crossed her features. "I should have intervened, but Barnes had a gun. I was afraid they'd kill Mr. Montgomery if I interfered, so I hid and watched as they forced his hand to sign that paper. You did the right thing, Lillian assured her, reaching across to squeeze the older woman's hand. Had you confronted them, they might have killed you both. What happened after they got the signature? Colt asked. They dragged Mr. Montgomery out to their wagon. I heard Harper say they needed to finish it properly where no one would find him for a good long while. Mrs. Espinosa crossed herself again. I followed at a distance. They took him north toward Devil's Canyon. Colt stood abruptly. Devil's Canyon? You're certain? Mrs. Espinosa nodded. As certain as I can be. I couldn't follow far on foot in the dark. What's Devil's Canyon? Lillian asked, alarmed by Colt's reaction. A maze of rock formations about 5 miles north of here, he explained grimly. Easy to get lost in. Easier still to hide a body. Or a badly injured man, Lillian suggested, unwilling to abandon hope. If they left Mr. Montgomery there 3 days ago, badly injured but alive, we need to search immediately, Colt agreed, already moving toward the door. Mrs. Espinosa, can you make up a pack with water, food, and medical supplies, and prepare the blue room for Lillian Mrs. Madsen? Of course, the housekeeper agreed, hurrying to comply. I'm coming with you, Lillian declared, following Colt. He turned to face her, surprise evident on his features. It's dangerous terrain, Lillian. And if Harper or his men are still around, all the more reason for you not to go alone, she countered. I may not be familiar with the wilderness, but I'm not helpless. I can ride, and I have experience with basic medical care. Colt hesitated, clearly torn between practicality and concern for her safety. The canyon is treacherous. Narrow passages, unstable rocks, rattlesnakes, and a man who may be dying while we debate, Lillian finished for him. A man who invited me here in good faith. I have a responsibility to him, just as you do. Something shifted in Colt's expression, respect, perhaps, or newfound understanding. Very well, he conceded, but you follow my lead exactly. No risks, no heroics, agreed. Within 20 minutes, they were mounted on 2 of the ranch's horses, Colt on a powerful black gelding, Lillian on a steady bay mare that Mrs. Espinosa assured her was gentle but sure-footed. The housekeeper had packed supplies in saddlebags, including water, jerky, bandages, and a small bottle of whiskey for medicinal purposes. God be with you both, Mrs. Espinosa said as they prepared to depart. Bring him home safe if you can. We'll do our best, Colt promised. If Sheriff Brennan arrives while we're gone, tell him where we've headed. The ride north was challenging for Lillian, whose experience with horseback riding was limited to leisurely outings in Boston's parks. But the mare proved as reliable as promised, and Lillian soon found a rhythm that, while not entirely comfortable, was manageable. Colt set a brisk pace, clearly anxious to reach the canyon before dusk. He remained vigilant, frequently scanning the horizon and occasionally doubling back to ensure they weren't being followed. His concern was not misplaced. If Harper suspected they knew the truth about Montgomery's disappearance, he might take steps to silence them as well. They spoke little during the journey, both focused on the urgent task ahead. But as they approached a series of rocky outcroppings that marked the entrance to Devil's Canyon, Colt reined in his horse beside a small stream to allow the animals to drink. We'll enter the canyon on foot from here, he explained, dismounting. The horses can't navigate the narrower passages, and we'll move more quietly without them. Lillian slid from her saddle with less grace, but managed not to fall. Her legs were stiff and sore from the unaccustomed activity, but she ignored the discomfort as she helped Colt secure the horses to a sturdy pine. How will we know where to search? She asked, accepting the canteen he offered. If the canyon is as maze-like as you described, they could have taken Mr. Montgomery anywhere within it, "We'll start with the most accessible areas," Colt replied, checking his revolver before returning it to his holster. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a second, smaller pistol and held it out to her. "You know how to use one of these?" Lillian hesitated only briefly before accepting the weapon. "My father taught me basic firearms handling." "For protection," he said, "though I've never fired one outside of a few practice sessions. It's simple enough. 6 shots. Aim for the center of whatever you're trying to hit." His expression grew serious. "I don't anticipate trouble, but if we encounter Harper or his men, don't hesitate. They won't." The weight of the revolver in her hand made the danger of their situation suddenly more real. This wasn't Boston, with its policemen and civilized rules. This was the frontier, where justice often came from the barrel of a gun. "I understand," she said quietly, tucking the weapon into the pocket of her skirt. Colt studied her face for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw there. "Let's move. We have maybe 3 hours of daylight left." The entrance to Devil's Canyon was a narrow gap between 2 towering rock formations, barely wide enough for a single person to pass through. Beyond this initial gateway, the canyon opened slightly into a labyrinth of passages, some broad enough for a wagon, others mere crevices between massive boulders. "Stay close," Colt instructed, moving forward with the silent grace of a man accustomed to tracking and hunting. Lillian followed as best she could, grateful for the sturdy boots she'd purchased before leaving Boston. The terrain was treacherous loose rocks underfoot, sudden drops, and thorny vegetation that snagged at her skirts. The deeper they ventured into the canyon, the more oppressive the silence became, broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. They searched systematically, checking each passageway, calling Montgomery's name softly into the silence, listening for any response. With each passing hour, Lillian's hopes dimmed. If Calvin Montgomery had been left here 3 days ago, injured and possibly drugged, his chances of survival without water were slim. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon, casting long shadows through the canyon, when Colt suddenly raised a hand, signaling for her to stop. "What is it?" she whispered, moving closer. He pointed to the ground, where a faint but distinct trail of disturbed earth and scuffed rocks led toward a side passage they hadn't yet explored. "Someone came through here recently," he murmured. "Several people dragging something heavy." Hope rekindled in Lillian's chest. "Or someone." Colt drew his revolver. "Stay behind me." They followed the trail through a narrow passage that wound between high rock walls, emerging finally into a small box canyon, a natural enclosure perhaps 30 feet across, surrounded on all sides by steep rock faces. In the center of this space lay a dark bundle that, as they approached cautiously, revealed itself to be a man, bound and gagged, his clothing torn and dirty. "Cal!" Colt rushed forward, holstering his weapon as he knelt beside the motionless figure. Lillian was only steps behind him, her heart pounding with hope and fear. "Is he alive?" Colt confirmed, fingers pressed to Montgomery's neck. But barely. Calvin Montgomery was a man of medium height and build, with light brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard now matted with dirt and blood. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, and his breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. Colt quickly cut the ropes binding Montgomery's wrists and ankles, while Lillian gently removed the filthy gag from his mouth. The man's lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. "Water," Colt instructed, and Lillian hastily retrieved the canteen from her satchel. Together, they managed to trickle a small amount of water between Montgomery's parched lips. He coughed weakly but swallowed, a promising sign. "Cal," Colt said, lightly patting his friend's cheek. Cal, it's Colt. Can you hear me? Montgomery's uninjured eye fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening as recognition dawned. Colt. His voice was a barely audible rasp. How? Mrs. Espinosa saw them bring you here, Colt explained, relief evident in his voice. We've been searching the canyon. Montgomery's gaze shifted, finding Lillian for the first time. Confusion crossed his battered features. Who? Lillian Davies, she supplied gently. Your correspondence. Understanding and dismay flashed in his eye. Miss Davies, you shouldn't. Not safe. It's all right, she assured him. We're going to get you out of here. Montgomery tried to sit up but fell back with a groan of pain. Harper, he managed, tried to kill me, left me to die. We know, Colt said grimly, but you're safe now. Harper thinks he has the deed to your ranch, but I've bought it back from him. This news seemed to distress Montgomery further. No, Trap, Harper knew you'd come for me. Alarm shot through Lillian. Mr. Madsen, the warning came too late. A voice called from the entrance to the box canyon. Well, ain't this touching? They turned to find Dean Harper standing there, rifle aimed directly at them. Behind him, Fletcher and Barnes blocked the only exit, both similarly armed. Figured you'd come looking eventually, Harper drawled. Though I gotta say, bringing the lady along was a surprise. Not very gentlemanly of you, Madsen. Colt slowly rose to his feet, positioning himself between the gunmen and his injured friend. 3 against 1, Harper, not very sporting. Harper shrugged. Never claimed to be a sporting man. Just a practical one. He gestured with his rifle. Step away from Montgomery. You too, Mrs. Madsen, or is it still Miss Davies? Heard an interesting rumor about a hasty wedding this morning. Lillian stood, her hand drifting toward the pocket containing her revolver. The wedding was quite legal, I assure you. Course it was, Harper agreed with a mocking smile. And mighty convenient, too. Keeps me from claiming you along with the ranch. His smile faded. Except now I'm thinking maybe I'll just claim everything anyway. The ranch, the woman, and the satisfaction of putting Colt Madsen in the ground once and for all. You won't get away with murder, Colt said evenly. Sheriff Brennan already suspects you're behind Cal's disappearance. Suspects ain't the same as knows, Harper countered. And 3 more bodies in Devil's Canyon won't be found for months, if ever. Plenty of time for me to establish myself as the legitimate owner of the Montgomery ranch. He gestured to Fletcher. Tie them up. We'll leave them the same way we left Montgomery alive for now, but not for long. Fletcher hesitated, clearly less comfortable with outright murder than his employer. Dean, maybe we should just do as I say, Harper snapped. Unless you want to join them. Fletcher reluctantly moved forward with a coil of rope. Lillian tensed, knowing they had only moments to act. Her eyes met Colt's, and she saw in them not fear but calculation. He was waiting for the right moment. As Fletcher approached, Colt suddenly lunged forward, driving his shoulder into the smaller man's midsection. The impact sent both of them crashing to the ground, Fletcher's rifle discharging harmlessly into the air. In the same instant, Lillian withdrew her revolver and fired at Barnes, her shot going wide but causing him to duck for cover behind a boulder. The distraction gave her the moment she needed to dive for Montgomery, dragging him toward the minimal protection of a shallow depression in the canyon floor. Harper, cursing, swung his rifle toward Colt, who was grappling with Fletcher for control of the other weapon. Lillian aimed more carefully this time and fired again, the bullet striking rock inches from Harper's head, showering him with stone fragments. The confined space of the box canyon amplified the gunshots to a deafening roar. Dust and gun smoke filled the air as Harper returned fire, his shot striking the ground near Lillian's position. She covered Montgomery's body with her own, feeling him struggle weakly beneath her. Stay down, she urged him. Colt had gained control of Fletcher's rifle and was now using the terrified man as a shield, backing toward Lillian's position. Barnes, emboldened, emerged from behind his boulder, taking aim at Colt's exposed side. "Colt, look out!" Lillian cried, firing again. This time her bullet found its mark, striking Barnes in the shoulder. He yelped in pain, dropping his weapon. Harper, realizing his advantage was slipping, fired wildly, the shots ricocheting off the rock walls. One bullet struck Fletcher, who screamed and collapsed. Colt, now free of his human shield, raised the rifle and fired a single, precise shot. Harper staggered, a look of surprise on his face as a crimson stain spread across his shirt front. He fired once more, the shot going high before dropping to his knees, then falling face forward into the dust. A ringing silence followed, broken only by Barnes' moans of pain and the harsh sound of Colt's breathing as he moved swiftly to kick away Harper's rifle and confirm he was no longer a threat. "Is he dead?" Lillian asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "Yes." Colt quickly checked Fletcher as well. "This one too. Harper's last shot got him." Lillian turned her attention back to Montgomery, who had lost consciousness during the gunfight. "Mr. Montgomery needs a doctor urgently. He's very weak." Colt secured Barnes, who was clutching his wounded shoulder and babbling about how everything had been Harper's idea, before returning to kneel beside his friend. "We need to get him out of here before dark," Colt agreed, his expression grim as he assessed Montgomery's condition. "Can you handle a horse on your own? I'll need to take Cal with me," Lillian nodded. "What about him?" She gestured toward Barnes. "He can walk or stay behind," Colt said coldly. "His choice." They fashioned a crude stretcher from branches and Colt's coat, carefully placing the unconscious Montgomery upon it. The journey back through the canyon was slow and arduous, with Colt and Lillian taking turns dragging the stretcher while keeping Barnes at gunpoint ahead of them. By the time they reached the horses, twilight was deepening into dusk. Colt secured Montgomery to his saddle, mounting behind him to support his limp form. Barnes, his hands bound, was reluctantly allowed to ride double with Lillian, with stern warnings about the consequences of any attempted escape. They rode through the gathering darkness, the moon providing just enough light to follow the trail back to the Montgomery ranch. Twice they had to stop to check on Montgomery, whose condition seemed to be deteriorating despite their best efforts to stabilize him. It was nearly midnight when they finally reached the ranch house, where lights still glowed in the windows. Mrs. Espinosa rushed out at the sound of their approach, crying out in distress when she saw her employer's condition. "Sheriff Brennan arrived an hour ago," she informed them as they carefully carried Montgomery inside. "He's gone to gather a search party. And the doctor's here too. I sent for him when the sheriff said you'd gone to Devil's Canyon." Indeed, Dr. Wilson, a gray-haired man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression, was waiting in the parlor. He immediately took charge, directing them to carry Montgomery to his bedroom upstairs. "What happened out there?" Sheriff Brennan demanded once Montgomery was in the doctor's care. Colt explained the confrontation in the canyon while Mrs. Espinosa tended to Lillian's minor scrapes and bruises in the kitchen. Barnes, secured in a chair under the sheriff's watchful eye, corroborated enough of the story to confirm that Harper had indeed drugged Montgomery, forced him to sign over the deed, and left him to die in the canyon. "He said it was the perfect plan," Barnes whimpered. "Montgomery would disappear, we'd have the ranch, and we'd claim his mail-order bride when she arrived. No loose ends." "Except you didn't count on Mrs. Espinosa witnessing the abduction," Lillian pointed out, "or Mr. Madsen's intervention." "Harper didn't think anyone would care enough to investigate," Barnes admitted. Said even if they found Montgomery's body eventually, we'd be long established at the ranch, with no evidence connecting us to his death. Sheriff Brennan shook his head in disgust. You'll hang for this, Barnes. Accessory to kidnapping, attempted murder. I never wanted anyone hurt, Barnes protested. It was Harper's idea to leave Montgomery to die. Fletcher and I just wanted our share of the ranch profits. Tell it to the judge, the sheriff replied unsympathetically. For now, you're heading to jail. After Sheriff Brennan departed with his prisoner, Colt and Lillian waited anxiously for news of Montgomery's condition. Dr. Wilson emerged from the bedroom near dawn, looking tired but cautiously optimistic. He's stable for now, the doctor reported. Dehydration, exposure, several broken ribs, and a concussion. But he's young and strong. With proper care, he should recover. Relief washed over Lillian. Despite never having met Calvin Montgomery before today, she felt oddly responsible for him. Had he not invited her west, Harper might never have accelerated his plans to seize the ranch. Can we see him? Colt asked. Briefly, Dr. Wilson agreed. He's conscious but very weak. No excitement and only a few minutes. They entered the bedroom to find Montgomery propped against pillows, his face pale beneath the bruises and bandages. Despite his injuries, he attempted a smile when he saw them. Quite a welcome to Wyoming Territory, Miss Davies, he managed, his voice still hoarse but stronger than before. Not quite what I promised in my letters. Please, don't concern yourself with that now, Lillian said gently. All that matters is your recovery. Montgomery's gaze shifted to Colt. Sheriff Brennan told me what you did, buying back the ranch, coming after me. His voice faltered with emotion. I can never repay such a debt. No debt between friends, Colt replied gruffly. You'd have done the same. A shadow crossed Montgomery's face, and he mentioned you and Miss Davies have married. An awkward silence fell. Lillian glanced at Colt, unsure how to explain their unusual arrangement. It's complicated, Colt finally said. A temporary measure for Lillian's protection when Harper tried to claim her along with the ranch. Understanding dawned in Montgomery's eyes. I see. Very practical. He attempted another smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Congratulations, nonetheless. Dr. Wilson returned then, shooing them out with reminders that the patient needed rest. In the hallway, Lillian turned to Colt, troubled by the exchange. We should tell him the truth, she said quietly. That our marriage was merely a strategic alliance, not a romantic attachment. Colt studied her face in the dim light of the hallway. Is that what it was? Merely strategic? The question caught her off guard. Of course. What else could it be? We barely knew each other. And yet you trusted me enough to marry me, to follow me into Devil's Canyon, to fight alongside me when the shooting started. His voice had dropped to a near whisper. That suggests something beyond strategy, Lillian. Heat crept into her cheeks. I was desperate. You offered protection. Is that all I offered? He took a step closer, and suddenly the hallway seemed much narrower, the air between them charged with something Lillian couldn't or wouldn't name. Mr. Madsen, Colt, he corrected automatically. Colt. She took a steadying breath. We made an agreement. A temporary arrangement until Mr. Montgomery was found. Now he has been, and once he's recovered, we can proceed with an annulment as planned. Something flickered in those green eyes, disappointment perhaps, but he stepped back, restoring the proper distance between them. Of course, he said formally. As agreed. For now, though, you should rest. It's been a long day, and tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Mrs. Espinosa had prepared the blue room for Lillian as instructed. It was a lovely space, with delicate floral wallpaper, a four-poster bed with crisp white linens, and gauzy blue curtains that matched the quilt. A room prepared for Calvin Montgomery's bride, now occupied by the wife of another man. The irony wasn't lost on Lillian as she prepared for bed. Nor was the confusing tangle of emotions she felt when thinking about Colt Madsen. She had married him for protection, nothing more. Their arrangement was temporary, practical, so why did her heart race when he stood close? Why couldn't she forget the brief touch of his lips during their wedding ceremony? And why, as she drifted toward sleep in the pre-dawn stillness, was it Colt's face, rather than Calvin's, that filled her thoughts? The next few days established a new routine at the Montgomery ranch. Dr. Wilson visited daily to check on his patient, whose recovery progressed steadily if slowly. Sheriff Brennan brought news that Barnes had confessed fully, implicating both Harper and Fletcher in the plot to seize the ranch and eliminate Montgomery. Colt divided his time between the Montgomery ranch and his own property, the Lazy M, ensuring both operations continued to run smoothly. Lillian found herself unexpectedly useful, assisting Mrs. Espinosa with household management, helping to change Montgomery's bandages, and reading to him during his waking hours. A tenuous friendship developed between Lillian and Calvin Montgomery during these reading sessions. He was indeed the thoughtful, educated man his letters had suggested, kind, appreciative of her care, and unfailingly courteous. Yet there was a barrier between them that hadn't existed in their correspondence, a knowledge of what might have been that made their interactions slightly awkward. "You would have made an excellent rancher's wife," Montgomery remarked one afternoon as Lillian concluded a chapter of Thoreau's Walden. "Perhaps I still might be," she replied, then blushed at how the statement could be interpreted. "That is to say, there are many ranches in the territory." Montgomery smiled sadly. "Indeed there are, including one belonging to my friend Colt Madsen." Lillian closed the book, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Mr. Madsen and I have an understanding. Our marriage was a necessary measure to protect both me and your property. Once you're fully recovered, we intend to seek an annulment." "And then," Montgomery pressed gently, "will you return east, or might you consider other options here in Wyoming?" The question hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Despite everything, Calvin Montgomery was still interested in pursuing the relationship they'd begun through their correspondence. "I haven't decided," Lillian said carefully. "Recent events have complicated my plans." Montgomery nodded, accepting her non-answer with good grace. "Of course. Forgive my presumption." Later that evening, Lillian found herself on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The beauty of the landscape still took her breath away, so different from Boston's crowded streets and sooty skies. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention as a rider approached from the direction of the Lazy M. Even at a distance, she recognized Colt's straight-backed posture and broad shoulders. Something fluttered in her chest at the sight. Anticipation, she told herself, nothing more. He dismounted in one fluid motion, securing his horse to the hitching post before climbing the porch steps. His face was wind-burned, his clothes dusty from the trail, but his smile when he saw her was genuine. "Lillian, how's our patient today?" "Improving steadily," she replied. "Doctor Wilson says the danger of fever has passed and his ribs are healing well." "Good." Colt removed his hat, running a hand through hair damp with sweat. "And you, how are you faring?" "Well enough." She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Join me. The sunset is particularly beautiful tonight." He hesitated only briefly before sitting, stretching his long legs before him with a barely suppressed groan of relief. "Been in the saddle since dawn. My foreman at the Lazy M had some concerns about the north pasture fencing. All resolved, for now." He glanced at her. I've been thinking about our situation, Lillian. Her pulse quickened. Oh, Cal's recovery is progressing faster than I expected. Another week, maybe two, and he'll be well enough to manage without constant care. Yes, Dr. Wilson said much the same thing this morning. Which means we need to consider our next steps. Colt's voice was carefully neutral. You mentioned wanting to be part of the investigation into Harper's scheme. With Barnes' confession, that part is essentially complete. Justice will be served through the courts now. I see. Lillian looked out at the darkening landscape, trying to order her thoughts. So our arrangement has served its purpose. You're suggesting we proceed with ending it. I'm suggesting we discuss it, Colt corrected. There's no rush to decide tonight. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with unspoken questions. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the valley. Mr. Montgomery asked about my plans today, Lillian finally said. He implied he might still be interested in our original arrangement. Colt's expression remained unreadable in the fading light. And how did you respond? I told him I hadn't decided. She turned to face him directly. The truth is, I'm not sure what I want anymore. When I came west, I had a clear plan, a practical marriage to a man I believed I could respect and perhaps eventually care for. Security, purpose, a new beginning. And now everything is confused. I feel obligations in multiple directions to Mr. Montgomery, whose invitation brought me here, to you, who risked everything to protect me, and to myself and whatever future I might build here. Colt was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. What does your heart tell you, Lillian? The question startled her. My heart. This was never about matters of the heart. It was about practicality, security, was it? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When you agreed to marry me, a man you'd known less than a day, with a questionable past and a reputation for violence, was that truly just practicality? What else could it have been? She asked, but her voice lacked conviction even to her own ears. Colt stood, moving to the porch railing where he stood silhouetted against the last crimson streaks of sunset. I've been honest with you about most things, Lillian, but not everything. There's something you should know. She tensed, apprehensive. What is it? I knew who you were before you arrived in Sweetwater Springs. He turned to face her, his expression grave. Cal showed me your letters, as I mentioned, but he also showed me the small photograph you sent him. Lillian remembered the portrait, a formal studio photograph she'd had taken specifically to send to her prospective husband, showing her in her best dress with her hair arranged just so. I don't understand, she said, confused by this revelation. I was affected by that image, Colt admitted quietly. By your letters, too, which Cal sometimes read aloud when I visited. Your intelligence, your practical nature, your courage in agreeing to travel across the country to marry a stranger, all of it impressed me. I found myself envious of Cal's good fortune. Lillian's heart began to race. Are you saying? I'm saying that when I saw you step down from that stagecoach, I recognized you immediately. And when I realized Harper was trying to claim you along with the ranch, my offer of marriage wasn't entirely the selfless act of protection it appeared to be. His voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. Part of me wanted that marriage, temporary though it might be, because I'd already begun to care for you before we ever met. The confession hung in the air between them, as unexpected as it was affecting. Lillian found herself speechless, her carefully ordered thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. I don't tell you this to pressure you or complicate your decision, Colt continued when she remained silent, but you deserve to know the truth before you choose your path forward. And what path would you have me choose? Lillian asked when she finally found her voice. He moved closer just one step, but it was enough to bring him within reach. "The path that brings you happiness, Lillian, whether that's with Cal or back east or—" He hesitated. "Or with me, making our temporary arrangement permanent. Whatever you decide, I'll respect your choice." Before she could respond, the front door opened and Mrs. Espinosa appeared. "Mr. Madsen, I thought I heard your voice. Supper's nearly ready and Mr. Montgomery is asking for you both." The moment broken, Colt stepped back, settling his hat back on his head with a nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Espinosa. We'll be right in." As they followed the housekeeper inside, Lillian's mind whirled with Colt's unexpected revelation. He had cared for her before they met, through nothing more than letters meant for another man and a photograph. It seemed impossible, romantic in a way that had no place in the practical arrangement she'd envisioned for herself. Yet as she watched him greet Montgomery with genuine warmth, noting the ease between the two friends despite the complicated situation, Lillian couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Colt Madsen. There was a depth to him that intrigued her, a complexity beyond the capable, sometimes dangerous exterior he presented to the world. Supper was a strained affair, with Montgomery propped up in a chair at the dining table for the first time since his ordeal. Conversation remained carefully neutral ranch business, news from town, the progress of the case against Barnes. But underneath the mundane topics, Lillian felt undercurrents of tension, unspoken questions and competing desires. When Mrs. Espinosa served coffee and apple pie in the parlor afterward, Montgomery finally broached the subject they'd all been avoiding. "I believe it's time we discuss the future," he said, setting his coffee cup aside. "Specifically, the unusual situation the three of us find ourselves in." Colt, standing by the fireplace, merely nodded while Lillian perched on the edge of the settee, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Lillian came to Wyoming Territory at my invitation, as a potential bride," Montgomery continued. "Before that arrangement could be formalized, circumstances intervened, and she found herself married to you, Colt, as a matter of protection." "That's correct," Colt acknowledged. Montgomery turned his attention to Lillian. "You've mentioned this marriage was intended to be temporary, an arrangement to be dissolved once I recovered, and the situation with Harper was resolved." "Yes," Lillian confirmed, her voice steadier than she felt. "That was our agreement. Well, I am recovering and Harper is dead. His accomplice will face justice." Montgomery glanced between them. "Which brings us to the question of what happens next." A tense silence fell. Lillian looked at Colt, whose expression remained carefully neutral, giving her no indication of his preference despite his earlier confession. "I still consider myself bound by the commitment I made in my correspondence with you, Mr. Montgomery," Lillian finally said. "If you wish to proceed with our original arrangement once my current marriage is resolved, I would honor that commitment." Montgomery smiled sadly. "That's very proper of you, Lillian, but I asked what you want, not what you feel obligated to do." The directness of the question caught her off guard. I'm not certain." "I think perhaps you are," Montgomery said gently. "I've observed you these past days, both of you. There's something between you that goes beyond a convenient arrangement." He turned to Colt. "Am I wrong, old friend?" Colt's jaw tightened. "Cal, this isn't, it's exactly the right time," Montgomery interrupted. "We're all adults here and the situation requires clarity." He leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement. "Colt, do you wish to remain married to Lillian?" Put so bluntly, the question seemed to hang in the air like a physical thing. Lillian found herself holding her breath, waiting for Colt's answer. "Yes," Colt said finally, the single word resonating with quiet conviction. "But not if it's merely out of obligation or gratitude on her part." Montgomery nodded as if confirming something he'd already known. "Lillian, what do you wish?" All eyes turned to her. In that moment, Lillian realized the truth that had been growing within her since that first day in Sweetwater Springs. The practical arrangement she'd planned had been supplanted by something unexpected, genuine feeling for a man who had risked everything to protect her. "I came west seeking security and purpose," she began slowly. "A practical partnership with a man I might learn to care for in time." She looked at Montgomery. "Your letters suggested you were that man, thoughtful, educated, kind, and meeting you has confirmed those qualities." Montgomery inclined his head in acknowledgement but remained silent, waiting for her to continue. But something happened that I didn't anticipate. Lillian's gaze shifted to Colt. "I found myself drawn to a different kind of man entirely, one whose actions spoke louder than any letter could. One who was willing to sacrifice his savings, his safety, even potentially his life to help a friend and protect a woman he barely knew." Colt's expression remained carefully controlled, but something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or uncertainty. "The arrangement Mr. Madsen and I made was indeed meant to be temporary," Lillian continued. "But I find myself reluctant to end it, not out of obligation or gratitude, but because I've developed genuine feelings that I didn't expect and don't fully understand yet." A smile touched Montgomery's lips. "I think that's the most honest answer any of us could hope for." He looked at Colt. "You're a fortunate man, my friend. More fortunate than you deserve, perhaps." Colt moved to Lillian's side, taking her hand gently in his. "Far more fortunate than I deserve," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "Lillian, are you saying—" "I'm saying I'd like to try," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. "Not a temporary arrangement, but a real marriage, built day by day as we come to know each other truly." The smile that transformed Colt's features made him look younger, less burdened by whatever past had shaped him. "Nothing would make me happier." Montgomery cleared his throat. "Well, that settles matters then. The ranch deed should be returned to my name, of course, but I believe I still owe you $5,000, Colt." "Absolutely not," Colt replied firmly. "That money bought justice, not property. The ranch is yours, free and clear as it should be. Nevertheless, I'm in your debt." Montgomery's expression grew thoughtful. "Perhaps there's another way I can repay you both." He turned to Lillian. "You mentioned in your letters that you were a teacher in Boston." "Yes, at a ladies' seminary," she confirmed. "Why?" "Sweetwater Springs has been trying to establish a proper school for years. The town council has set aside land and some funds, but they haven't found a suitable teacher willing to settle in such a remote location." Montgomery smiled. "I believe you might be exactly what the community needs." Lillian's eyes widened at the suggestion. "A school? Here? The children of Sweetwater Springs deserve an education," Montgomery continued. "And you deserve a purpose beyond being simply a rancher's wife, though I've no doubt you'd excel at that role as well." The idea took root immediately in Lillian's heart. Teaching had been her passion in Boston, a calling she'd reluctantly set aside when circumstances forced her westward. To continue that work here in her new home seemed like a gift beyond measure. "I would be honored," she said, smiling. "If the town council approves, of course." "They will," Colt assured her. "Especially with Cal's endorsement. He's the most respected man in the county." Montgomery waved away the compliment. "Then it's settled. You'll both remain at the Lazy M. Lillian will establish the town's first proper school, and I—" He hesitated. "I will continue my recovery and perhaps consider my own future. One that might eventually include a wife, though perhaps I'll court a local lady rather than send away for one." His gentle humor dissolved any remaining tension. As the evening concluded, Lillian felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path forward was clear now, not the one she'd planned, but one that promised both security and, unexpectedly, happiness. Later, as Colt prepared to return to the Lyceum for the night, he and Lillian stood together on the porch once more, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear Wyoming sky. "Will you come to the Lyceum tomorrow?" he asked. "I'd like to show you your new home if you're willing." "I'd like that," she replied, "though I should continue helping with Mr. Montgomery's care for at least another week." "Of course." Colt took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Lillian, I want you to know I meant what I said. I don't expect anything from you that you're not ready to give. We can take this slowly, build our marriage properly." The consideration in his words touched her deeply. "Thank you, but I think perhaps we've already begun building it from the moment you intervened when Dean Harper tried to claim me." Colt smiled, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture both old-fashioned and affecting. "Then we have a solid foundation already." "Indeed we do." Lillian surprised herself by rising on tiptoe to place a soft kiss on his cheek. "Good night, Mr. Madsen." "Colt," he corrected automatically, his eyes warm in the lamplight spilling from the house windows. "Good night, Colt," she amended with a smile. "Until tomorrow." As she watched him ride away into the moonlit night, Lillian reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken since arriving in Sweetwater Springs. She had come west as a mail-order bride, seeking security through a practical arrangement with a man she knew only through letters. Instead, she had found something she hadn't even known to look for: a connection to a man whose actions had spoken louder than words ever could, a community that needed her skills, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined in Boston. The frontier had tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated, revealing strengths she hadn't known she possessed. And in doing so, it had given her not just the security she sought, but the promise of genuine happiness with Colt Madsen, a man who had risked everything to protect her, and in the process, had won her heart. 1 month later, Lillian stood in the doorway of the newly constructed Sweetwater Springs schoolhouse, watching as parents and children gathered for the first day of classes. The simple wooden building with its bell tower and rows of neat desks represented both her new purpose and the community's investment in its future. Colt appeared beside her, handsome in a clean suit he donned specially for the occasion. "Ready, Mrs. Madsen?" he asked, pride evident in his voice. "Ready, Mr. Madsen," she confirmed, smoothing the front of her best dress. Together they greeted the families, Colt introducing her with obvious pride as Mrs. Lillian Madsen, formerly of Boston's finest ladies' seminary. The children eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, while their parents offered warm welcomes and grateful handshakes. Calvin Montgomery arrived last, moving slowly but steadily with the aid of a cane. His recovery had progressed well, and while he still tired easily, he had resumed management of his ranch with Mrs. Espinosa's devoted assistance. "Congratulations, Lillian," he said, surveying the schoolroom with approval. "Sweetwater Springs is fortunate to have you." "Thank you for suggesting it," she replied sincerely. "Teaching has always been my passion." Montgomery nodded, then turned to Colt. "A word with you outside, old friend, man to man." As the two stepped outside, Lillian busied herself organizing her desk, but she couldn't help glancing through the window to where they stood in earnest conversation. Whatever Montgomery was saying, Colt was listening intently, nodding occasionally. When they returned, Montgomery bid her farewell with a warm smile. "You'll do wonderfully, Lillian. And remember, you're always welcome at the Montgomery Ranch." After he departed, Colt remained by her side as she called the children to order for their first lesson. His presence was reassuring, solid, as 20 young faces turned expectantly toward her. What did Mr. Montgomery want to discuss? She whispered as the children opened their readers. Colt smiled, his green eyes warm with an emotion that still made her heart race. He wanted to make sure I understood how fortunate I am to have won your heart, and to warn me that if I ever fail to appreciate that fact, he'll personally ensure I regret it. Lillian suppressed a laugh. And what did you tell him? That I already know I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming Territory, Colt replied simply. And that I intend to spend every day proving worthy of the trust you've placed in me. With a final squeeze of her hand, he retreated to a bench at the back of the classroom, content to watch as she began her first lesson in her new community. As Lillian addressed her students, she felt a profound sense of belonging. The mail-order bride who had feared a stranger would claim her had found her true place not as property to be possessed, but as a beloved wife and respected teacher, building a life she could never have imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach just 1 month before. And Colt Madsen, watching his wife with undisguised admiration, silently renewed the vow he'd made on their wedding night, to protect, cherish, and honor the remarkable woman who had transformed his life with her courage, intelligence, and unexpected love. Their beginning may have been unconventional, born of necessity and danger, but their future stretched before them full of promise, a true partnership forged in the crucible of the Wyoming frontier, and tempered by a love neither had expected to find. 5 years later, Lillian sat on the front porch of the Lazy M Ranch house, watching as Colt taught their 4-year-old daughter Catherine to ride her pony in the fenced yard. The little girl, with her mother's chestnut hair and her father's determined green eyes, sat proudly in the small saddle, giggling as Colt led the gentle pony in careful circles. "Mama, look," Catherine called, waving one hand excitedly. "I'm riding all by myself." "I see you, darling," Lillian called back, smiling at her daughter's exaggeration. Colt's hand remained firmly on the lead rope, ensuring the child's safety. At 2 years old, their son Thomas napped peacefully in the cradle beside her chair, his dark hair damp with afternoon sweat. He was the image of his father already, with the same serious expression when contemplating something new. The Lazy M had prospered under Colt's management, expanding to nearly twice its original size. The Sweetwater Springs School had flourished as well, with Lillian continuing to teach 3 days a week, now assisted by a young woman she'd trained herself. Calvin Montgomery remained a close friend and a frequent visitor to the Madsen home. 2 years earlier, he had married Martha Simmons' widowed daughter, who had returned to Sweetwater Springs from Denver. Their union had brought him the companionship he deserved, and the light of happiness had returned fully to his eyes. As for Dean Harper's schemes, justice had been served. Barnes had been sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, his testimony ensuring that the full truth about Harper's plot became known. The citizens of Sweetwater Springs had been horrified by the attempt to murder one of their most respected residents, and Harper's name was now spoken only as a cautionary tale about greed and its consequences. Lillian's reverie was interrupted as Colt lifted Catherine from her pony and sent her running toward the house. "Go show Mama what a good rider you are," he called after her. "I'll take care of Thunder." The little girl scrambled onto the porch, her face flushed with excitement. "Did you see, Mama? I'm the best rider in Wyoming Territory." "Indeed you are," Lillian agreed, pulling her daughter close for a hug. "Just like your father. Papa says when I'm bigger, we can ride to Grandpa Cal's ranch together, all the way there and back in 1 day." Catherine's eyes widened at the thought of such an adventure. "That will be something to look forward to," Lillian said, smoothing her daughter's wind-blown hair. "For now, Why don't you go inside and ask Mrs. Jensen for a cookie? Then you can help her set the table for supper." As Catherine disappeared inside, Colt joined Lillian on the porch, settling into the chair beside her with a contented sigh. "She's fearless, that one," he said proudly. "Going to be an even better rider than her old man someday." "She has your determination, certainly," Lillian agreed, glancing fondly at her sleeping son. "And this one has your thoughtfulness, watching everything, taking it all in before he decides to participate." Colt reached over to take her hand, a gesture that had become second nature over the years but still sent a pleasant warmth through her. "They're the best of both of us," he said softly, "just as I hoped they would be." Lillian squeezed his hand, thinking back to that day in Sweetwater Springs when she'd stepped down from the stagecoach into an unknown future. How differently things might have turned out had Colt Madsen not been there to intervene when Dean Harper attempted to claim her. "What are you thinking about?" Colt asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "The day we met," she replied honestly. "How frightened I was, arriving in a strange place to marry a man I'd never seen, and then everything went wrong in ways I couldn't have imagined." "Or right, depending on your perspective," Colt added with a smile. Lillian nodded. "Very right indeed. Though I wouldn't want to relive those first few days, the gunfight in Devil's Canyon was quite enough adventure for one lifetime." "You were magnificent," Colt recalled. "I'd never seen a Boston lady handle a revolver so capably." "Pure desperation," Lillian laughed. "I'm just thankful I didn't accidentally shoot you instead of Barnes." They fell silent, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in familiar golds and crimsons. After a moment, Colt spoke again, his voice reflective. "I've never regretted a single day of our marriage, Lillian. Not even in the beginning, when it was meant to be temporary. Some part of me knew, even then, that what we had was rare and worth fighting for." Lillian turned to study his face, still handsome though now bearing the additional lines that 5 years of Wyoming weather and fatherhood had etched there. "Nor have I," she said softly, "though I was slower to recognize it, perhaps, too concerned with propriety and obligations." "You needed time," Colt acknowledged. "I was willing to wait as long as necessary. Not so very long as it turned out." Lillian smiled at the memory of their true wedding night, several weeks after that first hasty ceremony, when their marriage had evolved from legal arrangement to genuine union in every sense. From inside came the sound of Catherine's laughter, followed by Mrs. Jensen's gentle admonition about proper table manners. Thomas stirred in his cradle but settled again without waking, one small fist pressed against his cheek. "We've built something beautiful here," Lillian said, taking in the ranch house, the prosperous land stretching toward the horizon, and most importantly, the family they had created together. "Yes, we have." Colt raised her hand to his lips, a gesture he still performed with the same reverence as he had that first night on Montgomery's porch. "And we're only just beginning, Mrs. Madsen." As the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that the young woman who had boarded a stagecoach in Boston, seeking security and a practical arrangement, had found something far more precious instead. She had found love, purpose, and a home with Colt Madsen, the man who had claimed her heart when she least expected it, in the wild and beautiful territory of Wyoming. And in that realization was perfect contentment,